I couldn't be more excited to show you today the extension of this table saw. This thing is going to be great. I'm going to get a lot of use out of it. Let's get started. Now, here's the problem I had before. I had this blue Formica piece of wood. I actually got this when I bought the table saw off of somebody a couple of years ago. It worked okay. It gave me good space, but I could never get around my table saw extension, and it was very cumbersome. I didn't need anything that big. So by replacing this with something a little bit nicer, I have the opportunity not only to get around my table saw extension, but also access the drawers that I have in my assembly table. This, for me, in a small shop, is a game changer. Now, I will tell you, this table was designed by 3x3 Custom. It was a video she put out a couple of years ago, a great kind of how-to video. She had rollers that came out, which I don't need because I've got an assembly table right here. And I'm going to show you how I built this for my Harvey table saw, so stay tuned. I didn't have a piece of wood thick enough, so I had to glue two 3/4 inch pieces together and plane the pieces so that it would fit perfectly in between the bottom and top of the U-channel. I used a round over bit on my router to soften each corner so it would slide all the way back into the channel. Then I cut the board to 35 inches, which just happens to be what I wanted for the full length of the extension. Then I needed to mark these two button head screws on the back of the channel that holds the channel to the table. I needed to drill a couple round recessions so they would not interfere. After drilling these sessions, I was able to mark the hole pattern in the bottom of the channel. There's 6 holes, and I wanted to use all 6 of them. I know this looks like a beast, but it does perform a few critical functions. The rectangular plate on top, in this case is 3/4 inch plywood, holds the brackets that are attached to the table. And secondly, supports the bracket plate from the back of the table saw cabinet. I didn't have any bulk wood, so I had to glue a lot of 3/4 inch pieces together to create that spacing. I'm also wondering if this mask can help prevent the table from being too flimsy in the up position once I get everything installed. Like Tamar at 3x3 Custom, I decided to put a coat of paint to hide this albatross. Then I used double stick tape to attach a temporary plate to the top of the saw bracket we already installed. I added this backing block, I pre-drilled the holes and countersunk them, and I put the screws in. And I pushed it right up against the saw bracket that I had installed previously. I previously marked these screw locations to avoid any screws that I installed in the saw bracket. That is one of the biggest issues with this design. With the backing block spacing, it should be perfectly vertical with the saw table. Then I drilled the screws in, and I used a number of screws because this is one of the joints that I think will get a lot of flexing. Then I took another 3/4 inch piece of wood, the same wood that I've been using for the whole project, and cut it the length of the table and the width of the saw bracket and the backing block, so it kind of covers all that up. Then I planed it to the thickness so it would be slightly lower than the top of the table. I think in the end I ended up somewhere between maybe a 1/16 or a 32nd underneath that. I marked the holes to attach it to the saw plate, being sure again not to interfere with all those screws that I'd already installed. You almost run out of room when you try to put these screws in. Well, not really. I pre-drilled and countersunk these and the holes so the screw heads wouldn't stick up at all and interfere when you're pushing wood across. Okay, now it's onto the table. I cut a piece of MDF 35 inches wide and about 21 inches deep. This allows me to get around the table when it's in the up position, which is absolute critical for me. I cut off the corners because I'm always running into the corner of something, and I thought this was help. I used MDF instead of 3/4 inch plywood because, well, I'm a little cheap. I'm trying to keep my costs down. I framed it with
1 3/4 inch wide poplar, and don't ask me why I used 1 3/4 inch. I think again I was trying to maximize the thickness of the board that I had and try to use as much of it as I could. I glued and nailed and added a few screws to hold this frame together. I bought a full sheet of Formica for a number of projects around the shop. Never used Formica before. I've never cut it. I've never glued it. Never routed it, but I was going to figure it out. You notice I have my mask on. I set up my particle counter on the table. You might see it behind the piece that I'm working on. The HCHOs, I think that's like formaldehyde or something. It went nuts when I was gluing this. I had to open the garage door to air things out right after I did this shot. I also didn't have a roller to roll the Formica out, so I used my hands and that was good enough. I completely framed out the inside of the table frame and attached screws to the table and to the outside frame, giving it a lot more rigidity. Notice I had 2 rails going down the center for strength and for the table because that's where the rails would attach to it. That knot you see at the end of the table was supposed to be on the inside. Forgot to flip the board around. My bad. A little sanding on the ends of the table and it was done. I rigged up a plate where the top of the table should be, and then I measured down the width of the table, and that's where I installed my brackets. Best I could do without somebody standing there or an extra pair of hands to help me. I had pre-marked and pre-drilled the holes in the plywood. Believe it or not, I had these brackets in my stockpile for over 4 years. I bought them for another project that I wanted to do, but they didn't work out, so I just kept them. Funny that I pulled them out now, and it was just what I wanted. One thing I didn't do was check to see if the brackets were exactly 90 degrees when they were open. I don't know why I didn't do that. I don't know why I expected them to be perfect, but they weren't. They were about 1/8 of an inch too high on the extended end, which means when you push a piece of wood through, it's going to rise up instead of kind of end down. Not a good situation. I put a small spacer behind the bracket on the top screw for each bracket. That easily corrected the situation. I set the table on the brackets. I put an 1/8 inch spacer between the table and the top plate on the table saw so that when you fold it down, it won't rub on that piece when you attach it to the saw. Then I pre-marked and pre-drilled the holes, and all I needed to do was install. I built a simple jig out of scrap wood to route the slots in the table for the table miter saw to go through. I made it just slightly wider than the ones in the table saw because I wanted to have a little flexibility. I also installed a collar on the router to follow the slot in the jig. Just made it a lot easier. And with some double stick tape to hold it down, and I used the fence to align it, I was all set. I thought it was a little aggressive on the first slot, so I used 2 passes on the second.
I really couldn't be more happy with this table saw extension for my table saw. This worked out great. I want to thank 3x3 Custom for her design. She sells plans on her website for it. I didn't think I needed the plans because she did such a great job at explaining how she put this together. I think the keys that anybody has to be concerned about is the hole pattern for the screws and the bolts. Unbelievable when you think about where you've got to put the bolts in the beam that goes across here, and then the bolts for this plate on the back, and then the screws for the plate on the top. It gets a little bit cumbersome, but as long as you mark everything out, you'll be just fine. Yeah, I'm just thrilled with how this works, and I can't wait to get an opportunity to use it more. This is Dave with Level Up Woodworking. I appreciate you watching today. If you haven't subscribed, I'd love it if you subscribe, and if you like this video, hit like, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.